Welcome. Hello, I'm Ike of Ike Comics, and I'm drawing page 22 of episode 2 of my comic First Sun and Sword today. And in this draw process series, I always show the drawing of the page while I share some thoughts and techniques over the video. So here we go. It was fun last week when I talked about focal length, like wide-angle lenses and telephoto lenses. It's just really interesting. And I know it's really hard to explain and to make sense of even, and to understand how to apply it to comics, but it seems very interesting to me. I see artists that do effects like sort of solar flare effects, and backgrounds that are there's no background, like maybe there's no ink lines, there's just color behind a character, but you know that that's the same location. To me, that is an example of a blurred background. And the way I draw, where we all draw with inking, when the inks are black especially, and when they're more consistent in line weight, especially then, we can either show things in focus or entirely out of focus. That's one way to approach it. And of course, feathering, cross-hatching, broken lines, these are all ways to show something's more out of focus. Something I do is also messier lines. I let my lines be more wobbly, crooked, not being so crisp. Even on buildings and stuff. And that conveys that wobbliness of my line conveys the blurriness of the object itself in a metaphorical way. I wrote a little bit about it on thecleverkaiju.com on the blogs. So all my webcomics are there, and I share blog entries on there every now and then. And after talking about it last week, I wanted to be able to show pictures and say more. So you'll find that there. And along with some other ones I've done, writing about drawing stairs and choosing colors and stuff. Here on this page, I know it looks really loose as I'm penciling it out, so you don't get a good view of what I'm constructing. It may be hard to tell what it is until you see me add a darker pencil next. This is my layout, my rough pencils, my thumbnails even. And you can see how I construct the physical space, construct the panel, plan where the word balloons are going to go. What we have here is Sun is waiting at the door, for the girl to return, with looking out the door, hoping no one approaches, because he saw some men asking about him and Sword and Farah. And as soon as she gets in, he tries to close the door behind her, but a man puts his foot in the doorway, and his shadow looms in the doorway as they sort of stand there frozen. So that's the final panel. We have the first 3 panels, each one growing in size from the one before. No, that isn't necessary. Each one could have been equal in size. But for some reason, I liked the feeling of it. Him peeking out the crack in the door in a nice, narrow panel. Peeking out of that tight panel. And in a way, in this last panel, when we get his view, his over-the-shoulder view of outside the door, that opening we're looking through is the size of the first panel, which is kind of interesting how that balances in a way. Trying to capture the right expression and some shadows, and lately I've been playing with doing less hard of shadows, less solid black shadow areas. You could say that that's like adding secondary lighting or ambient lighting to the shadow. But it's the way that I'm, inking slightly differently now using the nib. But still, I pencil with those shadows in mind, and you can see how I scribble those in. So I don't simply find the lines for the features, the outline of things, but I scribble in the shadows. As I construct my physical space, I'm also constructing the shadows. This second panel, it allows time to pass in a way and to remind us where he is, because we're returning to this scene after taking a break. So that's the establishing shot, show you where he is, remind you of that. And I put that in the middle. So I wanted to start this scene off with the close-up of Sun, of his face, his expression. I start right in with the emotion, that subjective. In a way, this is like starting with inductive rather than deductive. That's a term they use in editing of film, but or in writing and stuff too. But the idea of starting from the subject, the narrative premise or detail, and then broadening that out to the objective, to the situation, what it means. So you see simply the expression of the boy, and then we broaden that out to what it means, what the whole situation is from a specific piece of it, rather than starting with the broad scene and going to the specific pieces. So to some degree, I did that here. This room, I keep showing it from this same side of the room. For one, the way I've set up the room, there's stairs and a wall there. I mean, if this were film, unless you're going to remove the walls of the physical space you're in, you are limited by that. And of course we're not in comics, but if it looks like the view, the camera is from within a wall, then that's confusing too. So I'm going to consistently show this view of the room. Sometimes I question of myself even on, should I go more dynamic with the panels, with like the view, the camera. But I talked about this in the blog entry, and maybe a bit in last week's video too, but putting the camera where I put it and showing rooms like I do really helps convey the physical space, the distance between characters, their relationship to the space they're in. And to me, that helps me animate the scene in my mind. It feels like these people are actually there in a space. And if you do worm's eye view, bird's eye view, if you move the camera really low, really high, and get really dynamic, you, unless you're careful with establishing shots at least, and at least in that particular panel, you are removing the clarity of the object relations, how these things fit to each other in space. So I tend to do a slightly higher camera or eye level and just a nice view of things. Still love to get dynamic, and I want to do more of that over time, but this is what I sort of default to, just, pretty clear placement of things. So here, the foot, the boot in the door, this is shown in a way, it's close to Sun's POV, but it's not quite at his POV, and I don't know what people call that. But I like that, and you see that in film. So we're pretty comfortable with seeing a character, an over-the-shoulder shot. So it's not quite from the eyes of the character at what they're looking at. It's slightly from the side view. It gives us a little bit of space we're a little bit removed from that character's perspective. We're sort of watching them experience it rather than being them. And I like to do that with these POV shots. Like when we're seeing what he is seeing, we're also seeing it from a slightly off view than his. Yeah. So I like doing that. The last panel, I wanted to get back to the establishing shot, show Sun just standing there, the girl standing there looking back, and not reveal yet who's in the doorway there. I could have done a close-up on that last panel. I think these last 3 panels are the same size. There was no reason to vary them. But in the last panel, it could have been a close-up of a shadowy figure in the door. But we've already shown a close-up of the boot. We've gotten the effect of this is out of place. I could have just shown the door and shown the figure blocking that. Like kind of his shadow there, just kind of slightly showing, his figure slightly showing in the crack. But by bringing the camera further away, our characters, Sun and that girl, they seem kind of small in the space. It's sort of, it highlights how this is. They're sort of they're out in the open. They're exposed. They're vulnerable. They're just standing there as if they don't know what to do. They're small. I mean, they're literally looking small in the panel, and it causes a sense of time passing. So in a way, so if it was just a close-up shot of the guy's face kind of peeking through the door, or his hand, that does feel, even though it's on the same size panel as the other panels, to me it feels like less time is passing if it's like a close-up than if you do an establishing shot. If you do a bigger shot where someone might look at from a more objective perspective, and at a space where there's more objects in it, where they might look around for a minute, for a second or two, they might look around that panel. It makes it feel like more time passes. There is a theory, a long-standing theory in comics, that the width of a panel or size of the panel indicates how much time passes, and that readers will instinctively know this. So you should follow this rule. I don't think that is true exactly. I think there's truth in it, but I don't think it's literally how it works. Like what I just said, I have found that if it is a more objective shot, if it is a more complicated shot with multiple characters, if the camera's further away and you're seeing a bigger space, it can feel like more time passes to me than a close-up or something. Also, there's so many examples where that rule doesn't quite apply. If you had a panel that was borderless and had no background, and it took up, let's say, the middle section of a page, you had 3 panels at the top, an empty middle section with just a figure, just on a white background, or his face on a white background, and then go to 3 more panels. That huge panel that takes up the full width, it might take up a third of the page, the whole middle section. It's not going to feel like a long stretch of time, and in a way, it will feel outside of time by not having a border and being so set apart. It will feel like it's cut out from time, from the flow, from the flow of time from the other panels. So there's all sorts of ways to manipulate that, I believe. And of course, in the end, it's purely up to the subjective experience of the reader, how they are going to feel, interpret time and space and stuff in your comics. And the rules can be helpful and they're good to learn, but sometimes it's more nuanced, I think. Sometimes you will see that I draw some little lines into my shadows with the G-pen, the nib that I use. Even though later I'm going to come in with the brush pen and fill it in fully. The first page I did with the G-pen, I don't know what page that was, 14, I don't know. And yes, I did switch from using Micron to a G-pen in the middle of a comic. But the first page I did hatch everything in because I was just practicing using a nib, and I was just curious what I thought about it and how it looked, and I kind of liked it. It would have been okay. Now, when I'm hatching in, it's partly out of uncertainty, or if it's a really small space. My brush pen, this G pen can fill in a small space more accurately than my brush can, because it's not a great brush. So when I fill it in more, it's like in this first panel or around the stairs in shadow in the second panel here. That's because I'm kind of feeling out where I want to put the lines. I'm seeing if I have done my shadows correctly by filling it in some and getting a good look at it. And then I can see if I want to adjust the edge where the light turns to shadow, or any other edges like from the secondary light. So sometimes I fill in for that reason, because I'm just kind of feeling it out and adjusting things. And yes, I'm enjoying using this pen. I feel like I can get a little more organic, which really suits me well, because I don't like to do really straight lines. I don't rotate the paper. This is not a trick of the camera. I never rotate the paper around. I leave it clipped in a perfectly vertical fashion, and I try to keep my hands and head in a vertical fashion, which means I have to draw lines from awkward positions and try to use more of my shoulder to do it, less of my wrist or something. And by doing it that way and not using a ruler and not using a perspective grid, my lines can be a little wobbly. And so with a more organic line that I get from the G-pen rather than a Micron, it suits it better, I believe. These zigzag lines that I sometimes use, I used to use them a lot more. And it's like it's kind of like a feathering, or just it's meant to help with the transition from black to white to look like a gradient from black to white. And I don't use it as much as I used to. I used to put it everywhere, but I kind of get sick of seeing it. But sometimes I like to use it. And especially if it's a more dynamic page with more movement and happening. So here with their shadows, we have in this first panel on the left here, technically panel number 4, but the one on the left here, their shadows are kind of like at awkward angles, because they're sort of, it's the light coming through the crack in this door, which is kind of at different angles as it hits each of them. But instead of having a solid shadow go all the way out, it's transitioning because it's lit by other light. There's windows in this room, there's other light. So you have this hard shadow from the light at the door, but then it doesn't stay a hard shadow because it fades into being lit by another light source. And so I have it transitioning with that zigzagged line on suns. Rather than where it's transitioning into light. Sometimes I put it on the other end. It's just to keep it like looking dynamic. It's kind of like energy lines, speed lines, that you might see in manga. Let's see, what else? The shadows I'm applying here on Sun and on her. What we have is the transition on the right side of Sun's face there, from the light to shadow. That's the edge. But if everything after that was in shadow, there would be no indication of ambient or secondary light sources. There'd be nothing lighting it from behind or the other side. Shadows tend to, in any natural environment, they're harder, they're darker at that transition point from light to dark, and they tend to fade and be less dark as they go. So that's part of what I'm doing there. I could have thrown it all in shadow. For one, like I said, it's less realistic to do so because there is other light sources. Also, it would, because I have a shadow behind him, I put it all in black behind him, that side of his face, that ear, that it would all be disappear into shadow, which can be cool sometimes, but it makes the form of your character less clear. Some people deal with that by just using a white outline, just a line of white to separate the background blacks from the character's blacks. I don't do that very often because it's kind of hard to put in a clear, smooth white line unless maybe you use a paint pen or something at the end of the process. But it's also a little bit less real. In real life, it's not a perfect outline. It's not a line. It's going to be secondary lighting that follows the form of the figure and would vary in thickness, for example. So that's why the shadows were shaped the way they were in that panel. And one of the things I'm doing with these shadows is indicating form, not simply lighting. It's not simply trying to indicate this is where the light hits, this is where shadow is. It's partly form. So if you imagined a superhero drawing wearing like shiny plastic leather kind of material, someone might, or even metallic, shine, you might see the richer color or the darker part being more towards the middle. But usually with let's say it's shiny, there is the reflection. I don't know what you call that. The hot spot, the sort of the glare reflection, usually coming down in the middle of that black form. I know that's kind of hard to picture when I just say that, but the point is, you've seen it in inks before, where the blacks are used to indicate form, and especially with something that's reflective, like leather. And I'm applying that idea to everything. So if I don't know where I can point to that on this page, but sometimes I have an arm and I will put a thicker line on the tricep, and a thicker chunk of black on the tricep, and then another smaller chunk further down the arm. I might do it on the chest, put a chunk chunks of black to show a bigger chunk like at the chest or rib cage. Now, I'm partly when I do that, I'm partly representing the physical planes on the figure, but it's also like weight of the form. So a thicker, a larger black spot area on the form would indicate more weight, more there than at the thinner part of their form. So I'm using these shadows also to just indicate form, is what I'm saying, on figures. But again, also for lighting, because you can see that here where like the stairs are clearly in shadow. When I come in with colors, I'm doing a lighting pass now, and I treat that very much like a harsh lighting, and it does not follow the shadows exactly. So this is an area where I definitely take liberties, stylistically, artistically. There's a lot of liberties taken. Again, I already do, because my blacks are not just representing light and shadow. But then when I color and I apply a lighting pass on a figure, like you'll see in the very first panel where the sun's face is showing, I will put a strip, just a solid block of lighter color over him in that gap of the doorway. But in the shadow that I drew, it is not a straight line. It follows his form, and it follows the shape of his face, and it indicates form. It communicates form. The light I apply in the colors is not going to do that. It's going to be just a flat bar of light. Sometimes it'll follow the form or the planes of the figure. So obviously that's two different, ways of doing it being done at the same time. I feel like they work together. It's just kind of taking liberties, instinctual, as I, just figure out and decide how to do that. And again, I partly do it for ease, as I say in other videos. It's easier to apply a lighting pass that's really blocky, really simplistic. But it feels like it adds to it. You'll see that here where the doorway's open, where the door is open some, there's going to be lighting applied in the colors. So we have the finished page now. Beats of 3 and 2 in a way. Yes, here it is, the lighting pass. This is on a separate layer with opacity turned down on like a hard light mode, perhaps, with just a lighter yellow applied over the flat colors. Same with the shadows. It's a darker pass on maybe multiply. Of a dark kind of violet, perhaps. And that is the finished page. We have some close-ups, full body shots, half body shots. Even though none of them are super dynamic, super like standing out, the panels are all pretty similar in size, but we have some variety and feels good. So I'm happy with it. It's telling the story. And we're about to get into some running and fighting, and that's going to be fun. It'll be the first time in this issue that we start to get into that, and that's something I have a lot of fun with. And I like to put a lot of story into it. The fights have story to them. There's something going on psychologically. So that's going to be cool too to figure out. I'll see you next week.